In 1947, Castro became increasingly passionate about social justice. He traveled to the Dominican Republic to join an expedition attempting to overthrow the dictator, Rafael Trujillo. Castro then joined the Partido Ortodoxo, an anti-communist party founded to reform government corruption in Cuba. Its founder, Chivas, lost the 1948 election, but it inspired Castro to be a passionate disciple. Castro pursued his political ambitions as a candidate for a seat in the Cuban parliament, but Bautista successfully overthrew the government and canceled the election. Castro was left with no job or money, ending his marriage in 1955. In 1953, Castro and approximately 150 supporters attempted to overthrow the Bautista government. The attack failed and Castro was captured, tried, and convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The incident fostered an ongoing opposition to the government and made Castro famous throughout Cuba. He went to Mexico where he met Guevara, and there he devised a new strategy to overthrow the Bautista regime based on guerrilla warfare. They both shared the idea that the poor could only overthrow Bautista through violence. Upon entering to Cuba, Castro, his brother, and Guevara escaped Bautista's army and fled for 2 years, organizing resistance groups. He was able to establish himself as the government leader in small towns. He would organize the agrarian aspect of provinces, including reform and manufacturing. In 1958, Castro and his group of supporters were able to capture and hold key parts of Cuba. All these attempts to overthrow Bautista succeeded when Bautista fled to the DR. Cardona became prime minister while Castro became commander-in-chief of the military. However, in 1959, Castro was sworn in as prime minister after Cardona resigned. Castro established major reforms in order to end U.S. dependence in Cuba. American companies started noticing the downfalls of the reforms, causing tension between Cuba and the U.S. When Castro made an appearance in the U.S. in 1959, President Eisenhower refused meeting him. The next month, Castro signed the first agrarian reform law limiting the size of land holdings and made foreign property ownership illegal. As a result, Castro's revolution became radical, causing the government to begin establishing itself with the Soviet Union. Spanish-speaking advisors were sent from the USSR to organize Cuba's defense committee. Cuba agreed to buy oil from the Soviet Union later on, and when U.S.-owned refineries in Cuba refused to process that oil, problems began. As a result, the U.S. cut Cuba's imported quota on sugar. In 1961, U.S.'s relationship with Cuba was officially broken. On April 16, Castro announced Cuba to be a social state. The following day, 1,400 Cuban exiles invaded Cuba at the Bay of Pigs to overthrow Castro's regime. These exiles were then revealed to have been trained by the Central Intelligence Army and armed with U.S. weaponry. As a result of the incident, Castro denounced American imperialism and ended any form of democracy in Cuba. He also then announced that the Cuban government was adapting communist ideology. In 1962, the U.S. put in place a full economic embargo on Cuba. After this, Cuba's relationship with the USSR became stronger, to the point where the USSR placed nuclear missiles in Cuba just 90 miles off of Florida's coast. Kennedy requested the removal of the missiles, but then when the agreement was made in order to remove the missiles, it was only put in place if the U.S. agreed to not invade Cuba and to remove missiles from Turkey. Though this agreement did take place, it weakened Castro because he had no say in the negotiations. His shame resulted in anger. He formed a campaign to end imperialism in Latin America and African countries. He founded the Asia, Africa, Latin America's People's Solidarity Organization in 1966. The U.S. saw his regime as a threat. The CIA attempted to assassinate him a total of 638 times. However, his regime was still able to open 10,000 new schools and increase literacy to 98%. Castro, however, removed his opposition through execution and imprisonment. Castro's rule caused a total of 120,000 Cubans to flee to the U.S. As the people immigrated and the Soviet's economy weakened, Cuba's economy struggled. Castro was soon opened and international investment to help Cuba. Castro isolated Cuba for many years, but then realized he'd have to change his ways of rule.